The year 1899 marked the beginning of a unique and complex administrative experiment, the Anglo-Egyptian Condominium. For over half a century, Sudan would be governed as a single territory on the map, but the reality on the ground was a tale of two very different worlds. While sovereignty was technically shared between the British Crown and the Egyptian ruler, the British held the actual reins of power. This era was defined by a deliberate administrative bifurcation, a policy of divide and rule that would foster deep-seated divisions and institutionalize regional inequalities for generations. In the north, rapid investment flowed into infrastructure. The Gezira scheme, launched in 1911, transformed the region into a global cotton hub. Railways and Port Sudan connected the north to the world economy, creating a burgeoning middle class and a modern civil service. But the south was treated quite differently. Neglected by central planners, the region remained largely subsistence-based. To the British, the south was not a site for development, but a tribal zoo to be preserved in its primitive state, isolated from the march of modernity. British officials, nicknamed Bogons, governed the south with a paternalistic mindset. They believed they were protecting the pure African tribes from the contaminating influence of the Arab Islamic North, but in doing so, they ensured the South remained decades behind. By 1924, this separation was formalized as the Southern policy. It wasn't just a preference, it was a mandate. The goal was to develop the South along its own indigenous lines. In practice, this meant severing almost all cultural, economic, and administrative ties between the two regions. The Closed District Ordinances of 1922 gave the Governor-General absolute power to restrict movement. Northern merchants were expelled, and northern officials were replaced. The two Sudans were effectively being governed as separate countries under one name. The administration launched a campaign of cultural de-Arabization. Wearing Arab dress was discouraged. Arabic names were replaced with Christian ones. English was promoted as the new lingua franca, while indigenous customs were revitalized to create a distinct, separate identity. The chasm was most visible in education. In the north, the state established secular schools like Gordon Memorial College to train a civil service elite. They learned in Arabic and English, preparing to run the nation's future bureaucracy. But in the south, the government outsourced education entirely to Christian missionaries. This created a small, Christian-educated elite whose cultural outlook and language were entirely different from their counterparts in Khartoum, making future national integration nearly impossible. At the reshaped language conference in 1928, the British institutionalized this barrier. They standardized 6 southern languages using Latin script and explicitly rejected the use of Arabic. This decision ensured that the two halves of the country would quite literally speak different languages. By 1946, the world was changing. Facing the rise of northern nationalism and global pressure after World War II, the British abruptly reversed course. They decided that a unified Sudan was now the only viable path to independence, regardless of the divide they had built. In 1947, the Juba Conference brought the two sides together. Southern leaders expressed deep fear of being swallowed by the North. They argued for a slow transition and a federal system to protect their identity and autonomy. Despite their warnings, the conference ended with a recommendation for a single legislative assembly. Northern politicians promised equality, but to many Southerners it felt like their fate had been decided in a room where they held no real power. The South was tied to Khartoum. The betrayal became clear during Sudanization in 1954. As the British prepared to leave, 800 senior administrative posts were vacated. Southerners received only 4. The political marginalization of the South was no longer a fear, it was a reality. Months before independence, the tension exploded. In August 1955, the Equatoria Corps mutinied in Torit. It was the violent birth of the First Sudanese Civil War, a conflict that would define the region for the next 17 years. The British divide and rule strategy had successfully prevented a unified nationalist front, but it left behind a structural clash of cultures. The separate development paths had created 2 worlds within one map, and the soil was already fertile for decades of war. Understanding the condominium is the key to understanding why unity was so fragile. In our next series, we witness the birth of a nation's struggle, the walk towards Southern self-determination. I am Mr. Yol, and this is the Armchair Historian.